What's up, everyone? Rashim here, Wrestle with Change coach. Wanted to talk about something I was going to go over last week, but of course, I decided to change gears and talk about the Hell in a Cell match between Cody Rhodes and Seth Rollins, and basically dealing with unexpected change and that being a great example of that. So I wanted to circle back and talk about what I wanted to discuss last week. So this week I wanted to talk about uh, how to deal with um, change from the standpoint of like slow progress or slow change. I think that one of the things that many of us encounter is when we decide to embrace making a change, and being like fully invested in it, wanting change to happen like really fast and happen like overnight, and not really invest in the process. So I want to talk about that. I mean, one of my I shouldn't even say one of my favorite quote is infinite patience produces immediate results. So I heard that quote on an audio book by Dr. Wayne Dyer, and when I heard it, I paused and I like replayed it back. And I don't know, I just like it hit me um, kind of differently than other things that were being said in the audiobook. And at first, I didn't quite it didn't quite register like what he meant when he said it. And then the more I listened to the audiobook and listened to him and thought about it more and more, it started to make more sense. So again, that quote is infinite patience produces immediate results. And so as it relates to change, committing to making a change, um, and going through everything that you need to go through. Like I said, a lot of times we want the result to happen um, as quick as possible, and a lot of times it doesn't work out that way. One of the things I was thinking about in terms of progress and evolution as it relates to the wrestling business is women's professional wrestling. Um, and I was just thinking about, I was like, man, like yeah, there's been a lot of growth over the years as far as with women's professional wrestling. And I would imagine anyone who is like younger than, I guess, 25, maybe 30 years old, probably doesn't like fully understand how much women's wrestling has evolved over the years. And my first recollection of like women's wrestling was 1984. There was an event called the Brawl to End It All, I think it was called, and it was televised by MTV, which was like a big deal. And it was a match featuring probably one of the most famous female wrestlers of all time, and certainly at that time the most recognized female wrestler. That was the fabulous Moolah, who started wrestling like in the early 50s. So by the time 1984 rolls around, like she's been in the business for over 30 years. And I think she had the women's championship for like 28 years, 27 years, something ridiculous. And she uh, went up against Wendy Richter. So Fabulous Moolah was the champion, and Wendy Richter was a challenger. And as a part of the whole marketing of the match, it was like the was it wrestling, rock and wrestling connection or something like that with MTV. And because Cyndi Lauper was in the corner of Wendy Richter and Captain Lou Albano was in the corner of Fabulous Moolah. So it was a big, production, big, advertising surrounded it. And like I said, MTV was involved. The thing that's really interesting, and I don't know if like even people really understood the significance of the event at the time. Certainly I didn't because I was a little kid. But that match was, I believe, at Madison Square Garden in New York. And there was like 10, 11 matches on that card. And that match between Fabulous Moolah and Wendy Richter was the only match that was televised by MTV. So they televised that one match, and that was it. And the match and the event drew like the highest rating that MTV ever had at that time. So it's a pretty significant moment in women's wrestling history, but I don't, like, I don't know if it gets talked about enough. So, like I said, that was like mid '80s, and through the mid to late '80s, there were other female wrestlers that came along and kind of helped advance the progression of women's wrestling. So there was like, I remember Sherry Martel, who would later go on to be like a manager for Randy Savage and Shawn Michaels. Um, there was Bull Nagano. She had a pretty decent run as women's champion. Alundra Blaze. Um, so some people may remember her as Medusa, and also remember her as the WWF Women's Champion that left the WWF, now called the WWE, and went to WCW, and she still had possession of the WWF title, and she dropped it in the garbage can. So, and then you go into the '90s, and mid, talking about like Attitude Era. So then you start getting into people like Ivory, Jacqueline, China, and then towards the end of that decade and into the early 2000s, that's where you start to see women like Lita, Trish Stratus come along. And I'm talking WWE, but there were obviously other wrestling promotions going on in this country and around the world. But WWE and has been the most recognized wrestling promotion in the world, for a long time now. So certainly was at that particular time, them in WCW. But WCW wasn't really doing a whole lot with their women's division at that time, at least from what I recall. And then, so like I said, Lita, and for me, Lita and Trish, along with China too, really kind of help push women's wrestling out of the whole like gimmicky, just like really sexist type stuff that they were doing with women at that time. So it wasn't even really like wrestling. It was like, bra and panty matches and like mud wrestling matches. And, it was just, it was really, it was stuff that was geared at a particular demographic, young males. And that's what they were going for. And it worked, but it didn't, in my opinion, it didn't really do a lot to advance women's wrestling that particular time. And that particular time was, mid to late '90s when that was going on, and into the early 2000s a little bit. So there was like a women's championship that existed, but it wasn't like a ton of women's wrestling that was going on. I mean, if anything, you would see, maybe one match, if any, as far as women's wrestling at that time. And like I said, China, Lita, Trish Stratus, Mickey James, another one, kind of help, push the progression of women's wrestling. And then also around that time, you had TNA come onto the scene, and you had people like Gail Kim, who also had some time in WWE, and Awesome Kong, who I really enjoyed watching Awesome Kong work and perform. I thought that she was pretty underrated in the TNA. She built up a pretty good resume there. And then like Jessica Havoc came along too. I remember Jessica Havoc came onto the scene. She was doing things that I hadn't seen, women do in the ring. So I became a fan of hers as well. Um, but yeah, so they had this setback and then this progression. And if you want to fast forward all the way to present day, right? Like women's wrestling is in a much better place than it probably has ever been, but there's still like room to grow. So obviously, some of the names that people will recognize are people like Charlotte Flair and Becky Lynch and Bailey, Sasha Banks, Bianca Belair. Um, you know, AEW, I think, is doing a great job as far as with their women's wrestling, with people like Britt Baker. And I wasn't like Britt Baker was someone I wasn't completely sold on initially, and I think she's done like some really great work over the last couple years, and certainly deserves everything that she's been able to achieve so far. Thunder Rosa is the current champion. Just really good, entertaining stuff. But like I said, there's still progress to be made. If you watch most televised wrestling events, you may see at most two women's matches, maybe three. And then when you get to your pay-per-views or your premium live events, maybe one, maybe two women's matches on the card. So there's still like some room to grow. But I say all that to again circle back to dealing with change when it's not moving at the rate that you don't want it to move at. You want things to happen a lot more quicker. And again, infinite patience produces immediate results. For me, when I come back and I say when I first heard that phrase, what it meant to me, or just trying to process it. Once I finally got it, what it meant to me was the immediate result comes from the inner knowing that you have, which is basically the patience part of it, right? Once you understand, like if you just take your time and trust in yourself, trust in the process, that the result that you're looking for, it's pretty much already there. You just don't know like when it's going to happen, right? You just have to trust that it's going to happen at some point. And I think that's kind of a tough thing collectively for like every single female wrestler to like be on the same page. But I think that is, or at least it should be, the goal, right, of every female wrestler, is just kind of like trust in themselves, trust in the process, and eventually start getting the results that you want. And if you look at Pro Wrestling Illustrated, right, as a kid, I used to subscribe to Pro PWI magazine, and one of my favorite issues was the year-end awards. And I was always like curious to see who would win what award. And some of them were just a little bit predictable for me as a kid, but you know um, there were times where I was kind of caught off guard too by who won particular awards, because women's wrestling has really kind of had this slow progression. If you go, a lot of the awards that PWI has handed out, a lot of them kind of started like in the early 80s, maybe late 70s. A lot of them went to men. So tag team of the year, wrestler of the year, most hated, most popular, most improved. All those awards went to men professional wrestlers, but it didn't necessarily say like best male wrestler or best male tag team, right? So it was, the way I took it was all encompassing. And it hasn't been until recently where you start to see, the impact that, women have had on the business, and you start to see things like, Sasha Banks and Bailey, their match from NXT Takeover. I can't remember what year that was, but those of you know, I mean, it's a phenomenal match that ends up winning match of the year. I think there was a different year where Sasha and Bailey were feud of the year. Um, I think Sasha and Bailey were also tag team of the year, their first female tag team to win tag team of the year. So you see this progression. And then, a couple years back, um, WrestleMania that was here in Tampa, you had Sasha Banks and Bianca Belair, headline night one and put on this phenomenal match and end up winning a ESPY from ESPN because of that match. So we're seeing the seeds that were planted a long time ago by Fabulous Moolah, and then Wendy Richter and Alundra Blaze and China and so on and so forth, Lita, Trish Stratus. We're seeing those things start to bear fruit and starting to see women, getting similar opportunities that men wrestlers are getting, just not in the volume. So again, it's an example of how, if you just trust in yourself, trust in the process, that change, if it happens slowly, is not a bad thing. Certainly there are situations in life where immediate change and immediate results are needed, but for the most part, things that are significant that we want in life, it takes time. So I just wanted to, that was what I wanted to talk about, like I said last week, and decided to shift gears and go in another direction. But yeah, so tell me how that lands for you, if it resonates at all. Share any comments or any thoughts. Like, subscribe, share, and until next week, I will talk to you later. Peace and love.